Welcome to a word on cybersecurity. I'm Kurt Franklin, senior analyst at Omdia in the cybersecurity practice, and I'm joined today by Fernando Montenegro, senior principal analyst with Omdia Cyber. And Fernando, welcome to a word on cybersecurity.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I love having conversations. You and I speak on a regular basis on our own day-to-day thing. So it's great to be to do something similar in public.
It is great indeed. And you're here in, I think, a good week because it has been an active week in cybersecurity. And as you know, the whole basis of this particular LinkedIn Live is that we talk about boiling the activity of the week in cybersecurity down to a single word. So I ask you to pick a word. What word have you chosen? What word sums up cybersecurity in this week for you?
Well, for me, this is a busy week. So the word I picked was a plethora. Right, there has been a plethora of opportunities for us to pick on. So many things happening, from many of them. Whether you are an enterprise security practitioner, whether you are a vendor, anything, you can pick learnings from lots of things this week.
Okay, so we've got a plethora, and we will tell people if they don't know what plethora means. That's why God made dictionaries. Go up, look it up. But of the many things that happened, of this plethora of cybersecurity events this week, what stood out for you? What really made this? What made inclusion in your list that comprises the plethora?
So I like to look. So one of the things I think about is that cybersecurity is a much, much broader issue than just pure play technology, right? So whether that be the human element, whether that be the integration with the business, whether that be understanding value chain in the industry, whatever it is, right? So cybersecurity is much larger, and I've picked things from here and there. The one that the first one that stood out to me was, and it's not directly related to coverage. I cover primarily infrastructure security, but this one stood out, was the fact that we had yet another significant event in the Web3/NFT ecosystem, in that Axie Infinity had an incident where someone walked off with over $600 million worth of Ethereum, right? And that is, I mean, for all that we talk about in terms of breaches, yet another breach on this ecosystem. And I'm not a specialist in the field. I'm not going to go there. But the thing that stood out to me is that it's the perfect example of aligning some level of security to the business, right? I know we talk about the business align. That's the thing that happened here. Like the attack itself is that they were able to compromise a few nodes in the infrastructure that's used to connect one chain to another. That's basically what happened, right? And the problem here is that there were it's not a security problem. Like there isn't a patch to be had, right? It's a vulnerability in the business process, the vulnerability in user authentication. It's not just hey, we're going to scan for a vuln or something like that. So I thought that was particularly interesting. That was Axie, and I didn't know about the words. I picked out a word for each. So the plethora is the overall word, but for Axie it would definitely be business.
Well, now I'm curious because, like you, I don't claim to be an expert in all things cryptocurrency. That's not my area of specialty. But I noticed that the vulnerabilities, the breaches, tend to be in the wallets, tend to be in the ways of storing and moving currency, not in the generation of the currency. So not in the currency itself, but in the, if you will, the digital infrastructure around the currency. wonder if some of that might be because people are lulled into a false sense of security, thinking that all of this cryptocurrency, because it's based on blockchain, is, and I love this phrase, inherently secure. Uh, does that sense of security lead to some of this because people don't pay attention to the business processes and the infrastructure for storing the various components of the currency?
That's an interesting point. I mostly agree with it. I would say that there's that phrase. I think it was Willie Sutton, right? Why did he rob banks? It's because that's where the money was, right? And the I think it applies here too, in that yes, cryptocurrency and blockchain have built some strong fundamentals. I'm not going to go into the overall opinion on Web3 and whatnot. So, but to your point, it's always about how you are exploiting not the fundamental technology, but you're exploiting the business process on top of that technology, right? In Prior to joining Omdia, I've had some time working in anti-fraud, and we would see that all the time, right? It's not that someone exploited a vulnerability; it's that somebody exploited a flaw in the approval process for a money transfer, something like that. So similar things here. I agree with you, absolutely.
Well, since we're in violent agreement on this one, what's another of the incidents that happened this week that made your plethora?
Um, I, since you brought up as an incident, I wouldn't call it so much an incident as more discovery or continuation, right? It started last week, I believe, or the week before. The incident that was disclosed over at Okta, that that they had to deal with. One of their contractors being affected, and this week saw some more developments on that. I mean, basically, for what I was paying attention to is that an independent researcher uh, got a hold of internal documents that the incident response team provider that was hired by the contractor, right? Basically, those documents leaked, and they describe in a lot of detail what the actors actually did. So I thought that was interesting to pay attention to, and it highlights that some of the things that the attackers did were not that sophisticated, right? They were okay, let's RDP in, let's do something, and let's shut down the endpoint agent that's being used, and that was captured, right? So I think what caught my eye on this is two things. First of all, again, we go back to the basics, right? How are you doing security? How are you capturing, or how are you acting on in a way that you understand what's going on in your environment? It is really difficult. I'm not taking it away from people. So one of them is do the basics, and the basics are hard. I'll appreciate. I hate when people say, "Oh, just do this." No, there's no just in cybersecurity, right? This stuff is hard, but there is the basics, right? The other thing is that some of the fallout in relation to this has more to do with how the disclosure of the incident itself happened rather than the incident itself, right? So the lesson for practitioners, the lesson for vendors, etc., is first of all, there is always a fog of war in relation to vulnerabilities or disclosures. And be very, very careful about how you're handling communications when something like this gets discussed, right? This is not the time to invent how you do crisis communications. So teams should have crisis communications capabilities in place now, like before this stuff happens, right? So I think that was the lesson I took from a and again, if I was going to pick the word I picked for this from kind of political, but the word I picked for this was Watergate, right? And the relation to Watergate is that the blowback from everything that happened after right, was significantly larger than the event itself.
Right. I think that's important. And I also think it's going to be interesting because there are new laws, new regulations that have come down from the U.S. federal government
Yep.
that are going to require companies to disclose incidents. Companies within the 7 different critical infrastructure groups. And let me say, if you don't know whether your company is considered a critical infrastructure company, it probably is. The critical infrastructure is a broad net by the U.S. government's definition. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about this, if you'll recall,
Sure.
SolarWinds was a huge security issue because so many companies used SolarWinds as
Yes.
part of their security infrastructure. There are millions of companies out there that use Okta as part of their user authentication and identity. So does an issue with Okta have the potential to rise to the same level of concern that SolarWinds was just because of the size of their customer base?
So let's put it this way. First of all, making it clear, right? Everything that we know so far, and we only have secondhand information. Everything we know so far indicates that this was limited, right? So this particular incident was limited to a to a subset of accounts. And the reason I brought it up as something I think it's relevant is because not so much of the incident itself, but it was yet another example of how the follow up from an incident needs to be so carefully orchestrated. Not carefully orchestrated. It has to be authentic, right? It has to help the it has to show that you care and has to show that you know what's going on, right? So that's point number one. But to your point, I think that anytime there is infrastructure that is critical to the organization, it should be part of your planning. What would we do if something bad happens to it? And if, as we talk to executives, let's run a tabletop exercise. What happens if provider X of where X is a critical service for your organization, right? How do you handle a breach or an incident or at provider X of your service? So it absolutely needs to be. Right. Yeah.
I think that with this, an analog and something that's going to become important for more and more companies. Back in a previous lifetime, I worked as part of a public relations group for a company that ended up buying some airplanes.
Oh,
To show you how long ago this was, we bought some Lockheed L-1011s and used them as part of a charter air operation. But before we even put out the press release saying that we had finalized the purchase of the planes, we were putting together the book on what to do if a plane went down. In the worst case, and a plane goes down, what do you do? So, I mean, down to the minute, who is speaking for the company, who is, handing off, where are we, in great detail,
mhm.
precisely what happened in the worst case. And I think this is the sort of thing that certainly companies in the critical infrastructure fields need to have now. And I would argue that any company that has more than half a dozen customers probably needs to have something like this so that people know, as you say, so that they're not making up a communications plan in the moment when a an incident, an attack, whatever it is, has occurred.
And 100%. And I'll do one other point is that one of the joys of living in modern society is that there are experts. There is domain knowledge in multiple areas, and communications is one of them, right? So to the extent that you can, work with people who understand crisis communications. Don't let your security engineer make up your crisis communication plan. Don't let your legal counsel make up your communication plan, right? So bring in the right people to make the decisions, to formulate the plan, exactly like you said, ahead of time, right? So I think that was an element of that was interesting.
Well, we're about halfway through, so I'm going to give my word, and then we're going to talk about something that you and I talked about ahead of the show that had captured both of our attention. I think this is a twofer because it falls into my word and it's also part of your plethora. So it works beautifully.
Yes, go ahead.
My word for this week is social. And the reason for that is that we had notification of another incident that hit two big names in technology, Apple and Meta. And in this case, the threat actors went to them in the guise of law enforcement and convinced employees just to hand over information
Mm-hmm.
on customers, on users, and that is a classic social engineering technique. I think one could describe it as a specialized form of spear phishing, but this was one where it did not require going in and using a 0-day exploit. This is not going in and doing any of the classic, fuzzing techniques to get passwords. You didn't have to violate two-factor authentication. You just asked employees for the information and they gave it to you. And Fernando, I think that anyone in cybersecurity knows social engineering is a huge problem for companies. So let me ask one, do you have any more detail that you'd like to give on this? Because you and I were talking about it ahead of the show.
Well, I've looked at it at a high level, and I picked out this incident as well on account, not for the word social, but again for the word business, right? Once again, we have a scenario where there's a significant security breach or a significant security incident, I should say, right? Not in relation to a particular attack, not in relation to a technical attack, but in relation to we're exploiting something else. I could be wrong, and I was, as I say often as an analyst, I reserve the right to be wrong. I could be wrong, but I think that part of what made this possible is that it was an attack where there may have been compromises of law enforcement accounts from which to issue those requests. Right. So from what I understood, there was an element of that. But your point stands in that, hey, somebody's asking for this. Are we going to do this? And that there is a potential process flaw in that. Are these being validated? Have we validated these requests? Right. So once again, there is a social element to things. And there is a business element of, are we following? Does our process withstand this type of malicious tampering, right? If somebody is attacking the process, how robust is the process that we're making, really, right? And I think that this is part of the lesson that we get from this one.
Well, when you look at things like cybersecurity awareness training,
yes,
we tend to look at them from the standpoint of phishing and don't go and clicking on bad web links. But what you describe is, formally known as a business email compromise. It's one thing when an email comes from a spoofed address, and there are ways technologically to deal with that. There are ways behaviorally to deal with that,
Mhm.
hovering over links and seeing where they actually go. A business email compromise is something that comes from a legitimate email address, from a legitimate source, but sent by an illegitimate actor. And that's a different level of compromise. That's one that's much more difficult to tell someone that they should be wary of because, let's face it, we are conditioned, we are trained to be cooperative with law enforcement, with people who are ostensibly acting on our behalf or on behalf of our customers to try and keep everyone safe. So, I think there's a very real question of what you do to prepare your employees for requests and guard against the results of business email compromise. I'm not sure that anyone has come up with an easy and consistent answer to that. What do you think?
So, at the risk of putting my foot in my mouth, uh, something I do often, like one of the things that is a minor personal side note, like one of the things my kids hate is the dad jokes that I make. So I'll still try to add a couple here and there. It's after lunchtime in the East Coast, so I'll say I'll rise to the occasion. Oh, this is horrible, horrible, horrible. But anyway, um, one of the things that I see happening is that you raise a very good point about business email compromise. And my thinking is that, and I love observing human behavior and observing how people actually work. And one of the things I find fascinating is that we often try to say, okay, we're going to train you to not do this. We're going to train you to do that. We're going to train you to pay attention to this. We're going to train you to pay attention to that. Well, that's not how people work, right? If just for this call, you sent me a link for us to join on the platform. Okay, quick look. I trusted you, right? So I think that asking people to be on the lookout all the time, it's not feasible, period, right? What that means is that let's use technology where it makes sense. And I think you brought up a fantastic point about using technology to find spoofed email for business email compromise. Wonderful. Let's expand that, right? Let's have the security team work alongside the business, I'm doing air quotes here, right? To figure out where else do we implement security controls in an automatic manner that might work on something. So not saying that this is not saying that this is the answer to all problems, but can we implement multi-factor authentication for a transfer above a certain amount, right? Or can we? But can we implement a business process, and can we implement a culture within the company, right, where any employee is can feel and actually be fully protected, denying a request from the CEO, right, that they don't feel is legitimate, right? Because what the business email compromise and what these emergency data requests exploited is the notion of a time bound. I need you to act now, right? Can we build something with technology that is going to help give that person more context around that request, right? So I'm optimistic, and I think that yes, we can. Is it easy? Absolutely not. But can it be done? I think so. Sorry, I'm,
You know,
I'm
it's no, that's fine. And this is something that's going to vary from company to company and industry to industry,
yeah,
because I know that there was a few years back, there was a huge rise in fraud with the international shipping
yeah,
industry, because this is an industry where they are quite accustomed in the office of a shipping company. We're getting a call or a fax from a ship captain saying, I am in some far off port and I need $110,000 to be wired to this account to take care of customs before they'll unload my ship. And so that's time bound. It is an amount of money that is within the normal business context
Yep.
of the company. And in order to keep those ships from sitting there waiting for the CEO to approve something, a relatively low level employee has been empowered to make that happen. Oddly enough, bad guys figured this out, and so they were taking advantage of this. And you know, I think it's important to recognize in the world of security, there is no security that results in both a usable system and perfect security. Um, it is a trade off. And there are all kinds of risk calculations. I'm beginning research now on systems for risk quantification and risk management that'll
Yep.
be coming out later this year. Um, and it is a non-trivial problem. The science and technology is improving, but it's something that companies have to deal with. How.
I agree completely, and it's funny because I'm doing some work. I'm not like I've been a member of CIRA for many years, Society of Information Risk Analysts, right? And I help out when I can and so on. So it's a topic near and dear to my heart. The one point I'll raise is that not only do we need to understand the methods that we're using for risk quantification, to understand the threat model exercises that we're going to run and so on, but we also need to build the incentive structure and the psychological safety within organizations where those things are used, because it doesn't help if if your information risk analyst builds a phenomenal risk model for something, but they get overruled by someone that is and that overriding is because of fear, right? Or and that do you understand what I mean? And so I'm looking forward to your research. I help you out wherever I can. But it's it's a very complicated problem that involves organizational structure, incentives, behaviors, etc. It's a phenomenal topic. Like this industry never stops.
It does indeed. Well, while the industry never stops, this LinkedIn Live is going to
Oh,
stop
fair
in
point.
just a couple of minutes. We have raced through our time. Before we do say goodbye, Fernando, I'm going to ask you: do you have some stuff coming up that you want people to know about, and how can they follow you on social media?
Perfect. Thank you. So as part of, so I cover, I'm one of the analysts covering our infrastructure security here at Omdia. And on that, like we're constantly working on like my current area of like we cover network security, content security, cloud security, etc., and others. I'm taking a closer look at SASE, so Secure Access Service Edge and variations. So that's upcoming research we have coming up probably later this quarter or new quarter. Happy new quarter, by the way. And but we do have. I will be speaking virtually. Unfortunately, I can't travel, but I will be speaking virtually at Black Hat Asia in mid-May. So I'm looking forward to that. And before that, I can be found on social media at FS Montenegro on Twitter. I'm active on LinkedIn as well. And I try to be responsive, and I really enjoy the conversations, right? So with you, with our colleagues, with other analysts, with practitioners, with vendors, I love being it's the Latin in me. Like I'm social.
Well, I can't claim Latin heritage, but I'm a Southerner, so I get the talking, absolutely.
Brilliant.
And I've also got things coming up. I've got an article coming up on dark reading that should be there this afternoon. That's Friday,
Oh,
1st April, or at the very latest, early Monday morning. You can follow me on Twitter at KG4GWA and here on LinkedIn. By the way, if you are watching this on a recording, thank you. We're glad that you're doing that. But remember, a word on cybersecurity happens every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So think about showing up, being live. You can kibitz in the comments, and we will look forward to taking part in the conversation. Well, for my guest, Fernando Montenegro, and myself, thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody.